today's episode of Evolving Politics, I talk with Representative Alan Chester about Helene recovery and the REINS Act.
Thanks for having me.
What made you want to get into politics?
Glutton for punishment. Been a long time coming, and so joined the military at 17, got into law enforcement after that, and so just a history of public service. And then when COVID hit, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, it just kind of changed the landscape, and so I couldn't sit on the sidelines and do nothing.
Okay. Well, could you describe what it's like working in the General Assembly?
It's chaos most days. So you got to think, you got 120 people in the House and 50 people in the Senate, everybody with their own ideas, their own agendas, and their own way of doing things, all trying to bring it all together and make something happen. I think we, last week, I think we're about 450 bills in the filing process so far in the House and 300 in the Senate-ish. And so about 750 ideas. I doubt all of them are good.
Okay. Well, if it's all chaos in there, how do you work to make a bipartisan effort across the aisle?
Communication becomes incredibly important. The ability to just sit down and have conversations, much like this one, and be willing to hear people talk about what their ideas are and where they're coming from. I think the most important thing is to put your swords down and realize that the hero and villain archetypes really don't fit in that world like they do in campaign world, right? And during the campaign, you hear about how evil people are, and
right.
how, for our side, it's almost like every Republican is the savior, and every Democrat is the Antichrist, and that just doesn't fit into this building or that building, because what you really figure out is that everyone truly wants to do what they believe is best as they see it, and so. It's been amazing to me that oftentimes if we just sit down and have a simple conversation, you find out that even people that you disagree with politically, they agree that there's an issue that exists, but the solution is where we disagree. So we agree that there's a problem that needs to be fixed, like poverty or drugs, addiction, anything like that. We all agree that those are problems that we need to try to find a way to fix them. We just disagree on what the solution is.
Well, speaking about drugs, what do you think the mood is in the General Assembly about the possible legalization of cannabis in North Carolina?
So it depends on what you're talking about for legalization. So the big boogeyman in the room is what people consider decriminalization or legalization, and that's not. I think the appetite for that is very, very small. But if you're talking about medical cannabis for medical use, I think that's a different conversation. I think that there is an appetite for that because people are beginning to realize, especially, again, looking back at COVID and the vaccine and the side effects that were essentially forced upon the populace through that, and you look at the side effects for other prescription drugs, how can we articulate that medical cannabis is any less safe than what's already being prescribed? Okay.
Well, could you tell me about the REINS Act that you've been working on?
Yeah, so the REINS Act is an interesting little idea, not necessarily original to me. It fits within my political philosophy that the people should always have someone that they can hold accountable for the things that affect their life. I think that falls under the federalism platform and what we're supposed to represent. And so what this does is currently regulations go through the Rules Commission Board. And so that's a 10-member board. 5 members are appointed by the Speaker of the House. 5 members are appointed by the President Pro Tem of the Senate. So both of those are Republicans. And so you really have to look at what they're allowed to evaluate. So organizations, state entities, what have you, licensing boards, a lot of different venues or ways to get something into the rulemaking process. But then about 99% of them go through the rulemaking process first time. And so once you start looking at that, you start to realize that there's a problem there, right? We've got almost 111,000 regulations in the state of North Carolina. Again, I have a hard time believing they're all good ideas, right? 111,000 almost regulations in the state and nearly 100% success rate first time through. And so when you start to peel back the onion, you start to realize that there's 4 pillars that the Rules Commission evaluate regulations on, which is limited by statute. When we delegated that power to the Rules Commission as a General Assembly, we limited the scope of what they're allowed to evaluate. And two things they're not allowed to evaluate is the overall impact that it'll have on the general public and the merit. So whether it's a good regulation or a bad regulation, they don't evaluate those things because they're limited by general statute. So I think we should be evaluating the total impact of regulations and the merit of regulations, whether they're good or bad for the people that are going to be affected by them. And the people who are affected by them should have someone to hold accountable. So for instance is, you don't like a regulation, who do you hold accountable? You can vote me out all day long. I have nothing to do with who's appointed to the Rules Commission because that's Destin Hall from the Speaker's office who makes those appointments. Not saying they're bad people, but they're just not accountable to a majority of the state.
So it's really just an act to have somebody that residents can hold accountable. Because
that's all it is. It's all about accountability. It's not a power grab. We've been accused that it's a power grab by the General Assembly because we've been accused of taking power away from the governor over the past few years. And this is not that. This is a return of accountability to the people and to the chamber that you guys can hold most accountable. I'm elected in one of the smallest districts in the state and every 2 years. So it's very easy for you guys to hold me accountable directly. And it's interesting because WREL actually took me out of context. But they knew they took me out of context, so they didn't put it in quotes. But they said that Representative Chesser is afraid that legislators will be held accountable for something they had nothing to do with. It's kind of the opposite of what my intent is. I want us to be held accountable.
Right.
So I'm not afraid of accountability. And the fact is, right now, we have no say in it. I want us to have say in it so that we can be held accountable by the voters.
So you've talked about government overreach and wanting to kind of stop that more. Where do you see the line between the state's authority and federal government?
I think that's pretty well laid out. So there are clearly defined federal issues and there are clearly defined state issues. And I think that really comes down to the 10th Amendment. And so if it's not clearly defined as a federal issue in the Constitution, or implied in the Constitution, right? Because there are implied powers there as well, then it's reserved for the states. And so then it becomes a state's issue. And so that's where I kind of draw my line in the sand, is based off of the 10th Amendment. And so if we're going to talk about the 10th, we got to talk about the best one, which is the 9th Amendment, which preserves all rights for the people and explicitly states that not all rights need to be enumerated. Unlike powers have to be enumerated, rights don't.
Right. So earlier in the month, you were talking about Josh Stein. He released a statement talking about Donald Trump's meeting with President Zelensky, and you were talking about how you were a combat veteran. And it was kind of just, why would Josh Stein be getting involved in a national issue that really doesn't involve him? Well, why do you think he's getting so involved when we have issues here at home, especially with Helene recovery, and he's more focused on dealing with national issues?
Well, I think so. What he did was he signed on to a letter for the Democrat Governors Association, I believe. And so what that was a national opportunity, and he just signed on to it. The issue that I have is we've seen over the last 8 years what happens to our state when we have a governor that's focused on running for higher office rather than serving the people that elected him. And so that was just my call there, was we've got other things to be focused on. We've got the Helene recovery, which is the largest storm our state's ever faced. We've got a tight budget that's coming up part of it's because of the Helene recovery, part of it's because of tax cuts, part of it is just inflation. And so we've got a lot of big boy decisions that we need everybody sitting at the table acting like adults and focused on fixing these issues, so we don't have time to be fighting over national issues that don't matter to our state.
Right. Now, at the Nash GOP convention, you actually talked about how now, with the Republican majority we've had over like the past 10 years in the General Assembly, we have a budget surplus. And then you created the Republicans in the General Assembly created a rainy day fund. If you look back, before Republicans took it, I think Bev Perdue was governor and Democrats controlled both chambers. There was a budget deficit of about $2 billion.
Yeah, so, we owed the federal government $2 billion or close to $2 billion. And so through fiscal prudence and lowering our spending while cutting taxes, that's why that's such an accomplishment, is people think that those things can't coexist. we were able to dig our way out of that hole. But now we're actually able to increase spending while cutting taxes. Because what happens is when you return that funding to the people, they spend it.
Right.
They don't squander it. When people are afraid of economic collapse, that's when they really hoard their savings. When they think that everything's good and healthy, the economy is healthy, they will still save, but they'll also feel more comfortable spending excess funds. And so you ultimately, by lowering the tax burden on the people, you increase business, you increase economic activity, and you increase individual spending.
Right. Okay. And I also wanted to look at, as a combat veteran, a lot of Democrats in the state, also on a national level, have been saying that Republicans are trying to strip away veterans' benefits. What's your take on that?
I don't think there's any accuracy to that at all. I think it would be fair to say that what's happening in D.C. right now is a full-on audit of the federal government, like we've never seen before, at least in recent history. I can't think of it in my lifetime. And I think it's time for that to happen. And so there's a lot of what we would call unregulated bureaucratic spending that's already been exposed. But I think it's more fear-mongering than it is anything else. The actual impact of what these audits are showing will come back down to reality within the next few months, probably.
Okay, and I've been seeing a Doge-like movement in the General Assembly. There's been some talk of it, and a lot of, I know some Democratic think tanks like Carolina Forward have talked about, this is a bad thing because of these reasons. And also, if you look back, though, in the past, people like Stein have even said we need to have some more cost-cutting measures. Why do you think they're having this big 360 turn on we shouldn't be having these Doge efforts?
So I think, it's just political expediency because it's something that the Republican-controlled General Assembly is doing, some of the more left-leaning think tanks. So first, we have to acknowledge that there's a divide, right? There's a divide between activist and political leadership. And so a lot of these think tanks are controlled by the activists of the party. And so the activists are acting one way, and it happens on the Republican side as well, but the activists are sending out one message, while the political leadership, i.e. Josh Stein, is sending a different message. And he said, like you said in his State of the State, that this is an important thing, and he's also put it into practice. So with the new Helene recovery, he's not giving that to NCOR because of the failures they had. They're creating a new entity that is going to be heavily audited, and everything's going to be held accountable. And he's working with the Republicans in the General Assembly to make sure that goes forward in that path. So you have the activists sending one message, but political leadership sending a different message.
Okay, so there's actually a lot of working together.
Yeah, there has to be. When you have something this substantial, we don't have time for partisan bickering. When the tornadoes came through Rocky Mount, we had two tornadoes about roughly a year apart. We had to set aside our political swords and our political squabbles and make sure that the people that we represent had what they needed. And that you're just seeing that on such a larger scale out west right now.
Okay. So I also wanted to look at the COVID-19, as we talked about earlier. And there was this recent case in Happel versus Guilford Board of Education where a child was on a football team. The football team had a COVID outbreak. This was in 2021. And then they had to go get tested, but they couldn't get a hold of the mother because they were going to give them a vaccine. Mm-hmm. But the mother was not going to allow that to happen, but they didn't get a hold of her, so they gave it to them anyways. So in this recent decision, they said that you're basically allowed to sue over these things with the Board of Education, and these things can't happen. So what's your opinion on that?
So I think what you're beginning to see, and I think it needs to happen, is you're beginning to see this movement back into society where people are remembering that our children belong to us individually. So my children belong to me and my wife, not the school board and not the community. And so we should be able to weigh in and have say and authority in what vaccines they get, what goes into their body, and what they're exposed to. And you're seeing that movement kind of en masse over the last, I'd say, 18 months to 24 months in North Carolina. It's starting to really grow, and it's a bipartisan thing. People recognize that parental rights has been stolen for a anti-public education mantra, but it applies to so much more than just education. And on large, most people agree with it.
So what has the General Assembly been doing to maybe bring some more power back to parents, I guess you could say, when it comes to education?
So we passed like a parental bill of rights when it came to education. And there's a bill currently, we did that last year before, I think it was 2023. But right now, we've got a bill that's in the House about pretty close to this issue, and it is medical disclosures, essentially, where doctors can't hide medical information for parents with a few exceptions, which are obvious and agreed upon across the board. They should be sharing information with parents when parents are asking, and requiring parental consent for things like vaccines and procedures. And so there's a bill in the General Assembly right now. I believe it's Jennifer Balcom who's running that bill. I could be wrong on that, so if I am, I apologize. But it's not my bill, but it's in the House right now that is pushing for transparency in the medical field as well, because we think we've got education pretty well locked down. So the next logical step is to look at expanding parental access in the medical field.
So you see some bipartisan support on this?
Yeah. Again, there's political pushback from the activist side of things, but when you sit down and have the conversations with people and you actually show them what you're trying to avoid, it's common sense measures that people agree with.
Okay. Well, a few months back, I had the sheriff of Nash County, Keith Stone, on here, and he was talking about how you've brought back to your district more money than he's seen with past representatives, I guess, Galliard. How have you been able to bring so much money back into your district, and how have you seen that help?
So I think it's building relationships. So it takes relationships on both sides. One, if I don't know what people need, I can't fight for it. Mm-hmm. And then it's the relationships in the building, in the General Assembly. So you got to have relationships in the community to know what the needs in the community are. And then you have to have relationships in the building, in the General Assembly, so that other people care about what you need, right? You've got to, if I bring it to people, like just everybody in there wants, $500 million every cycle. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that they need $500 million every cycle. So you have to have the relationships where you can have the conversations about why it's important to you and why you need to be able to bring that back. And it's important. I think a lot of people think that, it's my money that I'm giving back. It's not. It's taxpayer money, mm-hmm. right? This is that surplus that you were referring to. And so we have what's called above the line and below the line spending. So below the line, when we're having our conversations, is the recurring spending that's already on the books. Above the line is one-time funding, non-recurring spending that essentially we're using surplus funding for, and we're trying to figure out the best way to use that and to utilize that funding. And so everybody's fighting for that above-the-line funding, but it's still just a surplus that we took from the taxpayers, and we're trying to figure out the best way to give it back. And so in the past, we haven't been getting what I believe is our fair share, and so I fight hard to make sure that we get as much of it back as we can.
Okay, and at the Nash GOP convention, again, you were speaking about how Democrats, you were speaking on Helene and how we now have a rainy day fund, so we're actually able to use that money to help out there, but how Democrats have been wanting to just spend, they've been talking before this happened about, we should just spend it, what's the point in having all this money sitting around? So could you tell me a little bit more about why it's so important to have a budget surplus?
Yeah, so I think, again, when we talk about, we all recognize problems, but we have different solutions to them. I think now we're all in agreement that it's important to have a healthy rainy day fund. It's actually interesting because I believe the Democrats put forth a proposal to double the size of our rainy day fund now. When my first 2 years in office, we sat through so many floor speeches about how we were being careless by having an excessively large rainy day fund, and we needed to spend that down and offer pay raises or what have you in the reoccurring range. Remember that below the line spending that we're talking about. So it's not a one-time expenditure. It's something that we've got to plan for year after year after year. They wanted to take that out of the rainy day fund, which is designed to handle, one-time expenditures, mm-hmm. not reoccurring expenditures. And so it's been an interesting shift to watch that come back, because we have about $4.7 billion. But like I said, out west, we're seeing estimates getting close to $60 billion in total damage. Now, some of that will be offset by federal dollars mm-hmm. coming down, but some of that's going to be the state's burden to bear.
Right. Okay. And the activist wing, as you're talking about the Democratic Party, has been saying a lot that the Republicans in General Assembly don't care about our educators. But how have you seen the Republicans in the majority care about our educators?
So we've got more funding going to schools than we've ever had in our state. Ever in history, more funding is going to the education. 60% of our total budget goes to education every year. If that doesn't show that we're making it a priority, I don't know what will. And so, one, Nash County is a direct benefactor of that. We're getting a $40 million grant that Lisa Barnes and I were able to bring back in conjunction with the county to build a brand new middle school in the southern part of the county. And it only requires a $4 million match from the county. So they're getting a $45 roughly million school for $4.5 million by the time everything's spent. The other piece that I'm a big data guy, so if you just look at the data, it speaks for itself. Under Republican leadership, teachers have gotten a pay raise for 11 years in a row. That never happened under Democrat leadership. And it's not exactly a partisan issue, but I think it's kind of rich when the Democrats are attacking us for not caring about education, and we've made sure that when we have the funding available, the teachers are one of our priorities, and we're giving them the pay raises and rewarding them for the work that they're doing. And I think it hits locally a little tighter where we'll get into some legal terminology if you don't mind. You heard of a thing called supplanting funds?
I don't think so.
All right, fun little technical term. So with the breakdown of government, we are what we call an appropriator at the General Assembly. We appropriate funds, which means we have a bucket of money and we assign it for a particular use. All right, and then I give it to you. So say I give you $100,000 to build a house, and you decide, well, I could really use $50,000 of that to give pay raises to people, and then I'll get started on the house with $50,000 and hopefully I can finish it. Well, you have just supplanted that funding because you're using it in a way that it wasn't actually assigned for by the person who gave it to you or the authority who gave it to you. And so we had an issue with that, not necessarily any bad actors involved, but during COVID, there was a lot of money set aside for education and business and all that, and it went to local governments. But the money that was set aside for education, it really wasn't properly explained what they were allowed to use it for. And so here in Nash County, a fair sum, close to $2 million, was going to have to get clawed back because it was supplanted. It was spent on things that they shouldn't have spent it on. Again, poor explanation somewhere along the line led to that. I don't think it was any ill intent. But Lisa and I were able to get that forgiven, and that was all while the demerger was occurring as well, which was another bill that was going to come due for about $1.9 million that the state wasn't going to be giving Nash County School Board because of the students that were going to be relocated to Edgecombe. And so we were able to make sure that we got $2 million, I think it was $2.1 million, in the state budget to cover that. So to say that the Republicans that represent this area don't care about our teachers and our educators, I think we've put our money where our mouth is, where we brought nearly $50 million back just for education in the last 2 years.
Okay. So again, just with the bringing that's a lot of money back into your district. You're working together with, I guess, Senator Barnes to bring this money back. How does that work? Do you two both go and talk to both sides of the aisle and advocate, or how do you get all this money back for the education?
Yeah, so I think what we do, the way we found to make it work is we have pretty regular meetings, but especially around budget time, we sit down and she tells me about all the requests that came into her office, and I tell her about all of them that came into mine, and we sit down and we just lay them out on a spreadsheet and look at them and figure out which ones we think we can get the funding for and which ones we can't. But we together figure out what the priorities are going to be and what we're going to be able to fund. And then once we agree on that, we both go back to our independent chambers and start working. Because I can't get anything through the Senate and she can't get anything through the House. I don't have a vote there and she doesn't have a vote in my chamber. So we have to depend on our partners to do their job as well. And so it's all about relationship building. That's 100% of what it is in that building, is building relationships.
Okay. And is there any big news going on in the General Assembly that you'd like to talk about?
I don't know. You trying to lead me somewhere?
I don't know. Maybe letting you lead me somewhere.
I mean, there's always something. So we've got, I don't know, we're trying to get into the budget session. So we just got the governor's budget in, which essentially I was just on State Lines talking about this. The governor sends in a budget every year, even though it's the Senate and the House that create the budget. And so really all we do at that, it's not necessarily the numbers that he's got on the paper, but we do look at where he's trying to spend money, essentially as like, we look at it kind of like he's signaling what his priorities are going to be. And so there's some interesting priorities that he's got in that particular budget that are just, like I said, interesting. So he wants to put a pause on tax cuts because we've got tax cuts that are scheduled to be triggered next year. I talked about that at the convention, where our income tax should go from 475 to 399, just automatic, because we have the revenues that are required by law for that trigger to take effect. And he wants to pause it. But then also he has line item tax credits for certain individuals within the tax code that don't currently exist, that he wants to create little carve-outs. And so, we prefer to just give everybody a fair shake. And he's kind of signaling that he wants to pick some winners and losers, but it's just campaign stuff. It's so
Right.
that he has an opportunity to campaign on something. And then one thing that we all agreed on was we were looking to get more school resource officers into schools and make sure our schools are safe. He actually talked about that at the State of the State and got a standing ovation from Republicans and Democrats. But the way in his budget that he's choosing to do that is by removing a $33 million grant for the Safer Schools initiative and moving it back over into the Department of Education. Well, the Safer Schools initiative is 100% designed to keep schools safe, but it's no longer in the Department of Education or public instruction. Now it's under the SBI. And that's because we as Republicans have looked at this and said that educating is one issue and safety is another issue, and they don't exactly coexist. And so what we want to do is focus on having trained professionals in public safety carry out the securing of our schools and making sure that that is a secure facility. If you think of it, our courthouses are protected that way, right? It's not the judges and the DAs that are guarding themselves. It's the sheriff's department. It's local law enforcement trained professionals in that area that are providing that security. And so we're looking to do the same thing where we can get some specialized training. In fact, Nash County is driving the ship on this. They're starting a pilot program here in Nash County where Nash County is going to be setting the standard for what school safety looks like. And hopefully we can expand that across the state.
Okay. And it's interesting that you bring up how they, the Republicans majority took it away from the education, the safety part to the SBI, because I was talking to Senator Newton about 2 weeks ago about how when he first got to the General Assembly, they had the idea that we should put most of the agencies kind of together, thinking that would work more smooth. But then now they've started to lay that back to where it's individual agencies doing their own thing. How are you seeing that yourself?
So I think haven't been there as long as Senator Newton to be able to look at kind of what works and what doesn't work. But what we're seeing is there are areas of expertise, and right now, like I said, education is a perfect one, because educating and safety, we all agree that schools should be safe, but that you don't even have to go to the same school, take the same classes in college, or do any of that. It doesn't require any of the same training, and so it seems to be a divergence in focus. In focus. And so what we're trying to do is create agencies that can truly specialize, to where we don't have a jack of all trades trying to do everything mediocre. We have truly specialized experts who can do what they do exceptionally well and then leverage that across the state. And so our goal is to have that as our platform and be able to see the results of having truly focused experts just raising the bar on education, on public safety, and so many other things, public health, across the board. So getting away from trying to get people to wear too many hats. I think we saw that problem with DMV, our former DMV commissioner. Well, I guess he's still current because they're looking for his replacement. He tried to wear too many hats, and the end product to the user at DMV is failing miserably. We looked it up. My wife looked it up yesterday, I believe. And right now, over the next 6 months, whatever the calendar is out at DMV that you're allowed to schedule, I think it's 6 months, it might be 90 days. But there are only 2 locations, Nags Head being one, I forget where the other one was, but neither one was within an hour and a half of our house, where we could get appointments if we wanted to renew our driver's license.
I had to go to Greenville to get my license.
That's unacceptable.
Right.
And it's because we have departments that try to do too much. And so what we're trying to find a way is to make sure that we're very targeted in our approach and they can become experts in what they do.
So who chooses the next commissioner of the DMV?
So that would be the governor and the Secretary of Transportation.
Okay, and I've seen where there's been committees who have been questioning Wayne Goodwin. How have those committees been going?
They've been going pretty good. I sit on oversight, so I think we've had Commissioner Goodwin in front of us 3 or 4 times now, and we've had him in front of the Transportation Appropriations Committee as well, which I'm a chair of that as well. And so I think it's good. I think right now everybody wants to pile on and just beat him over the head with it, but I'm just excited that we're going to get new blood in there and hopefully be able to turn a corner. While it's fun to poke fun at your political opponents from time to time, at the end of the day, it does no good if we're not moving the needle for the people of North Carolina and getting them the service that they expect.
Okay. And you were talking about taxes earlier in the tax breaks, and how in the budget y'all had planned for tax breaks, and then Stein had kind of been, I guess you say, flimsy on it with the certain people are going to get certain things.
Yeah, he wants, in his proposal, that's all it is.
Yeah, it's a proposal.
Is he's asking for us to pause the tax breaks.
Okay.
So they're set to trigger next year, and he wants to delay that, to just pause it and not let that tax break take effect.
Well, it's interesting if you go on Twitter. I mean, a lot of the time he's just saying we need more tax breaks. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see. You say one thing,
right,
but then there's another thing going on.
Well, it's a lot easier to campaign on, giving tax breaks to individuals than it is just tax breaks in general. And I don't necessarily want to call anybody out, but we'll just throw out some red meat here so I don't get in any trouble. And so if instead of giving tax cuts across the board to everyone, if we roll those back and say, we were going to give a 1.5% tax cut to everybody, if instead I give a 5% tax cut to firefighters, well, then I can campaign, look how much I support the firefighters.
Right.
And so that's kind of the difference here, is he's trying to pause the tax cuts for everybody so that he can go back and look at these individual cases that he wants to offer tax cuts to. But we're standing on, well, it's why don't we just show the love to everyone instead of picking winners and losers? So.
Okay. And also on taxes, I think the state of Mississippi, they either just ended the property tax or the income tax in their state. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was property tax. Would that ever be something possible in North Carolina?
So, I mean, anything is possible.
Right.
But I would say that it's doubtful that in the immediate future, probably not in my tenure in the General Assembly. I don't plan on staying there forever. Mm-hmm. Probably a self-inflicted term limit situation if I'm blessed to continue to get reelected. But the issue with that is the way our government is structured. A vast majority of the revenues generated by local government is based off of property taxes. Right. So municipal funding and county funding is very much dependent on property taxes. Mm-hmm. And so while at the state we can say this is what we want to do with property taxes, the state doesn't get property taxes. Mm-hmm. And so the impact is then felt at the county and municipal level. So we have to be very careful there, because a lot of the services that citizens depend on are provided also at the municipal and county level. The state doesn't pick up your trash, and the state doesn't send firefighters out to fight your fires at your house. Those are local governments that do that.
So how do you think a local government, if the property tax were to get rid of, how would they fix that in their budget? Would they have to cut things, or would they have other ways of going about it?
So what other states have done that are talking about getting rid of property taxes, they're not just getting rid of property tax, but they're also then adding a sales tax.
Okay. That
the local government then gets access to. And so it's not really removing a tax, it's just redirecting a tax. So, and So if we're talking about it from a political theory, I mean, I like the idea of not leasing my private property from a government agent. I'm a libertarian at heart. That speaks to me. But in a practical sense, recognizing that we're not getting rid of a tax, we're just shifting the tax to a different venue, which you can then say is a consumer use-based tax, which is better overall. Again, speaking to my libertarian leanings, we would prefer to have use-based taxing. But I wouldn't like the idea of trying to campaign on the fact that we got rid of a tax when we just shifted it. It's kind of like if you lower, well, not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but a lot of, we'll say local governments, they reevaluate properties, jack the values way up, and then barely lower the tax rate and just focus on lowering the tax rate and saying that they lowered the taxes, but the overall tax burden actually increased. And so I think we have to be transparent about the conversation that we're having. And if you're going to say you lower taxes, let's talk about tax burden, not tax rate.
Okay. Well, obviously now, this isn't a state issue. It's more federal. But since you were speaking about your libertarian ideas, I thought this would be interesting to talk about. But what's your views on the Federal Reserve Board?
So, yeah, I think we're getting in the Wayback Machine now. Because going back to when that thing was created, I kind of understand what they were trying to do, but having a printing press and a Federal Reserve that is not actually controlled or auditable by any government entity is a problem. Again, the people who we serve, we owe it to them to have accountability. And so the easiest way to hold government accountable is through audits. And so if it's not auditable, then it's not accountable. And so we've got a major problem with the Federal Reserve.
All right. And then on back to the state level, we're seeing with the new auditor. The other day he was at NASH convention, and he was even speaking about how he's having the auditor's office be audited by an outside agency.
Yep.
So do you think we're going to start seeing the benefit of that, and how will we see the benefit of that?
So I think the largest benefit that we will see under Dave Bullock's administration is public trust will go up, which is incredibly important. Because the worst thing you could have is an auditor that no one trusts.
Right.
And so not saying that we've had that, but it would just be a disaster. So increasing public trust, which is, I think, part of the reason why he's inviting an audit in. One, he just took over. So it probably helps him figure out where his needs for improvement within his own department are. But two, it would move mountains in building public trust. And so that's going to help down the road for when he releases audits that has some pretty negative impacts on local government and other government agencies. The public will believe what he's saying.
Right.
And so that's supremely important in this. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's an exciting time to be involved in this because, like I said, the time is now for transparency and accountability in government like never before.
Okay. And obviously we have a divided council state. We have some Republicans on there, Luke Farley, Dave Bullock, and then you also have Democrats on there. You're not on the council state, but how have you seen them work together? Or have you seen them work together?
So I haven't got to see it yet. I've got to see a few of them come by and try to interact with the General Assembly in different ways. And so right now it seems we may still be in what's called the honeymoon phase. But right now everybody seems to be pretty well getting along. I haven't seen anybody turn back and run to their corners yet, which is good. But the budget season has a way of making that happen.
Right.
So talk to me at the end of May, middle of June, and it might be a different story. But everybody's getting along pretty well right now.
So is that when the budget's going to be?
We'll be fully in the throes of budget debate by then.
Okay.
I would hope. We're always hopeful that we're going to get out of there by June 31st or June 30th, whatever the date, but the end of June. And it's just, it just doesn't normally happen. I don't think it's happened in the last 10 years at least. So,
do y'all do the budget yearly, or is it once every 2 years?
So it's a biennium budget. So what we will do is we'll do a budget for 2 years. Okay. But so it'll be, I'll just go back in time and look at 23. When we did the budget in 23, it was the 23 budget and then a projected budget for 24. And then what we did, as North Carolina has done recently, with pretty fair consistency is we overperform the projections. So then we get to come back and look at the 24, the projected budget, and then look at the surplus that we overperformed and figure out what we want to do with that.
Okay.
And so you'll end up with what they call a long session budget, which is the actual budget, and then a short session budget, which is just a budget amendment to the actual budget that's passed in the odd number years.
Okay.
So,
do state governments ever do continuing resolutions? Or is it always just a set budget?
They do. And when, so North Carolina, we will never be without a budget because we have a standing CR. So long before I got in, they passed a standing CR so that North Carolina government will never shut down. So if we don't have a budget by the end of June, the fiscal year clicks over July 1st, right? And so that's the new budget year. Well, so what they did was they said, okay, it automatically reverts back to the below the line spending from the budget cycle before. So
Okay.
all reoccurring spending will continue at its previous rate until we pass a budget.
Okay, how does the state affect the economy in North Carolina? Like, I know on the federal level, everyone has different opinions on how that should be. You have Keynesian economics principles, and you have laissez-faire. Is that also valid in state government, or is that more federal?
I think it still applies. I think so. Federal government is far too large. State government is probably a little bit too large as well. But it's the same principle where the best thing that state government can do to drive economic development is get out of the way. That's kind of the whole target of the REINS Act, is making sure that the regulations that we're burdening the people with and the businesses with are necessary, truly necessary, before they take effect. But so I think having a good tax climate, a good regulatory climate, good infrastructure, those are all things that can come from the state level that would help drive economic development.
Okay, and I know they're building a new Johnson & Johnson, I think, I don't really know what it is, but they're building something in Wilson, I think about a $2 billion investment there. So we're seeing some more money coming into the state through, I guess, better. How is the Republican majority, I guess is what I'm saying, bringing businesses into North Carolina?
I think those three things that I said, with our focus on having a firm, consistent, and seemingly reducing tax burden. Same thing with our regulatory burden. It's fairly consistent. It's predictable. We're not heavy-handed with our regulations and our burdens generally that we're placing on businesses. And then the infrastructure. We invest. We're known as the good road state. We invest heavily in our roads, our rail, and our ferries. We have multimodal that our DOT pays attention to. And so all those things play in when a company's looking at where they're going to go. The other piece of it is the UNC system, for, again, all the arguments that say Republicans don't care about education. The UNC system is considered one of the best higher education systems in the nation. And that is why we're able to attract all the advanced manufacturing and the technology jobs that we can, is because of the workforce availability that we have in this area.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.